I don't know, perhaps all of you are aware of the fact that my grandmother and my grandfather were both 13 years old when they were married. In those days it was quite normal for people at that age to get married. They started living together at the age of 15 or 16. And at that age, grandfather said he didn't know who the boss was going to be, who was going to lay down the rules and enforce them. And so he started going to the library and reading books on the subject. And obviously all these books were written by male chauvinists because they all talked about how the husband should lay down the rules and enforce them strictly. After reading these books, he came home one day and he confronted grandmother and said, "From tomorrow you are not going to stir out of the house without my permission. That is the law and you're going to obey it, and I want no arguments about it." And grandmother didn't say anything at all. She just quietly turned around and went to bed and got up the next day and continued to do what she always did. Continued to go out and visit and never bothered to get grandfather's permission. And so a few days later, when grandfather realized that she was not obeying him, he confronted her again and he said, "How dare you disobey me? Didn't I tell you you are not to stir out of the house without my permission?" And at that point, grandmother very quietly, without raising her voice or getting angry or agitated, very quietly she said to him that I was brought up to believe that we must always obey the elders in the house. And I believe the elders in this house are your parents. If you're trying to tell me that I should not obey your mother but obey you instead, let me know so that I can go and tell your mother I'm not going to obey you anymore. And of course grandfather couldn't tell her to do that, and so the whole matter was settled without anybody breaking up a relationship. And that, grandfather said, was the most profound lesson in nonviolent conflict resolution that he learned. So that, children, the emancipation of the so-called untouchable people in India, and he had programs going on in all these different fields. And all these programs needed funding. And so he decided the easiest way for him to raise money was to sell his autographs. And every morning and evening, when hundreds of people would assemble for his interfaith prayer services, they would all seek his autograph. So he put a fee of 5 rupees, which in today's terms would be approximately $5. For each autograph. And when I was living with him, it was my duty to go out into the audience and collect the autograph books and the money and bring it to him for his signature. He was very particular about the money, and he matched his signature with every 5 rupee note that came with it. And one day I thought to myself, I said, if everybody could get his autograph, why not me? After all, I'm his grandson and I deserve an autograph too. So I got myself a little autograph book and I slipped it into the pile because I didn't have any money. But when he came to that book, he said, "Why is there no money for this autograph?" And I said, "Because it's my book." And he said, "Well, you should know that I don't make an exception even for grandsons. That if you want an autograph, you will not only have to pay me for it, but you'll have to earn the money and pay me. Don't ask your parents for it." And I said, "No way. That you're my grandfather and I'm going to make you give me this autograph free." So he laughed and said, "All right, let's see who wins." From that day, every day, when he was in high-level political discussions with Indian politicians or British politicians, I would barge into the room with my autograph book and thrust it in his face and demand an autograph. My logic was that just to get rid of me, he would sign the book and give it to me. But instead, every time I became too boisterous, all he did was put his hands across my mouth, press my head against his chest, and went on talking politics. On many occasions, the other politicians used to get exasperated and they tell grandfather, why don't you give him the autograph and be done? He disturbs our meetings every day. And grandfather would just laugh and say, this is a private joke between the two of us. You don't have to get involved in it. And it was 18 miles outside the city of Durban. And in those days, it was total wilderness all around us. There were sugarcane plantations. Our nearest neighbors were miles away from us. So when my two sisters and I were growing up there, we didn't have anybody our age to relate to. So we would look forward to going into town and visiting friends and seeing a movie or something. And although today it may seem very easy that 18 miles is nothing, we can drive there every day. But in those days, driving 18 miles was a big thing, and it wasn't something we could do very easily. So we would look for the opportunities. One Saturday, I got that opportunity when my father had to go to town to attend a conference, and he didn't feel like driving that day, and so he asked me if I would drive him into town. And I jumped at the opportunity and said yes. And since I was going into town, my mom gave me a list of groceries that she needed. And on the way into town, my father reminded me of all the little chores that had been pending for a long time, like getting the car serviced and oil changed and all that. And he said, since you have the whole day to yourself, will you please attend to these chores? And I said, okay. And I did. When I dropped him off at the conference venue, he said, at 5 o'clock in the evening, I will wait for you outside this auditorium. You come and pick me up and we'll go home together. And I said, fine. And I rushed off and I did all the chores and bought all the groceries and did everything I was expected to do. Left the car in the garage with instructions to do whatever was necessary. And being a 16-year-old, I went straight to the nearest movie theater, and I got so engrossed in a John Wayne double feature that I didn't realize the passage of time. The movie ended at 5:30. And I ran from there to the garage and got the car and rushed to where my dad was waiting for me. It was almost 6 when I reached there, 1 hour late. And he was naturally anxious and wondering what happened to me, and he was pacing up and down. And so the first question he asked me is, why are you late? And instead of telling him the truth, I was so ashamed to tell him that I was sitting there watching a John Wayne double feature that I lied to him, and I said the car wasn't ready. I had to wait for the car, not realizing that he had already called the garage and asked them. When he caught me in the lie, he said, there's something wrong in the way I brought you up that didn't give you the courage to tell me the truth, that you felt you had to lie to me. And I've got to find out where I went wrong with you. And in order to do that, he said, I'm walking home 18 miles. I'm not coming with you in the car. There was absolutely nothing I could do to make him change his mind. He just started walking. Much of those 18 miles were through sugarcane plantations, dirt roads, late night, no lights. I couldn't leave him and go away. So for nearly 6 hours, I was crawling behind him in the car, watching him go through the pain and agony for the stupid lie that I uttered. And I decided there and then that I was never going to lie again. Important story. My grandfather used to be very fond of telling us, and it's very relevant for us today. It's a story of an ancient Indian king who once became very curious about the meaning of peace. And he invited all the intellectuals in his kingdom to come and explain the meaning of peace. Everybody came there and did their best, but nobody could convince the king. And one day there was an intellectual from another town who came on a visit, and the king asked him the meaning of peace. And this individual said, the only person who can give you a satisfactory answer is an old sage who lives outside your kingdom. But he is so old that he cannot come to you. You will have to go to him and ask him this question. So the next day the king went to this sage and asked him the meaning of peace. And the sage quietly went to the back of the house and came back with a grain of wheat and placed that grain of wheat on the king's palm and said, "Here is your answer." And of course the king didn't know what a grain of wheat had to do with peace, and he didn't want to show his ignorance. So he quietly clutched that grain of wheat and went back to the palace and found a little gold box, and he placed that grain of wheat in the box. And every morning he would get up and open the box to look for an answer, and he couldn't find any answers. So a few days later, when this intellectual came back on a return visit, the king asked him to explain. And that's when this intellectual said, "It's very simple." He said, "If you keep this grain of wheat in this box, nothing is going to happen. It will eventually rot and perish, and that will be the end of the story. But if you had let this grain of wheat interact with all the elements, if you had planted this outside in the soil, it would sprout and grow, and very soon you could have a whole field of wheat." And that is the meaning of peace. That if somebody has found peace and if they keep it locked up in their hearts, it will perish with them. But if they let it interact, it will sprout and grow, and very soon we could have a whole world of peacemakers. So I've come here this evening to share with you the grain of wheat that I got from my grandfather. And I hope that you won't let it rot and perish, but let it interact so that all of us together can transform this world and make it a better place for future generations. Thank you.